Here's how to close a sale of any type, of any product, of any price with 5 easy questions. Hey, my name is Rory Vaden, and I am the co-founder of Brand Builders Group, a New York Times bestselling author. But what you may not know about me is that I also started an 8-figure sales training company in my first entrepreneurial venture. I spent well over a decade training salespeople on how to sell. And so many people are afraid when it comes to selling, and specifically, they're afraid to ask for the order. But a huge part of selling is being able to help people make decisions. In fact, it's a great service to help people decide whether or not they should buy something. And being great at sales doesn't mean you're great at making people buy things they don't want. It means that you're great at helping people decide what is best for them. So let me give you these 5 questions because these will work no matter what you're selling in any geography, at any price point, or any product. You can literally use these 5 questions in this order to help bring anyone to a decision. Now, the first question starts earlier in the presentation. And here's the question. You just say, if I could show you something that would help you blank, would you be open-minded to learning about it and potentially moving forward? That's it. This is the open-minded question. All I'm going to do is sort of get conceptual agreement on the front end that they would be willing to entertain, that they might, under certain circumstances, maybe possibly buy if I showed them something that helped them solve their problem. But that's huge. That's a huge part of getting agreement at the end, is getting their commitment to be open-minded throughout your presentation. So that's the first question. It's an important one, and it happens much earlier in the conversation. Now, question number 2 happens towards the end of your presentation. And it doesn't matter what you're selling. All you do is ask a question, something like this. You say, what's your favorite part of what you've seen so far? This is an open-ended question, and you'll notice there's no wrong answer here. All we're doing is we want to open the door for them to tell us what it is that they like. If they don't want to buy, they're not going to say much in this question. But if they really did like what they saw, this question is magical because it's actually going to help them sell themselves. It's actually going to help them talk themselves into buying. And that's what great salesmanship is. It's not being a smooth talker. It's about being a master question asker. It's about being a world-class listener. But it's also about knowing how to craft questions in a way that help people make decisions that are best for themselves. And that's a great one. What is your favorite part of what you've seen so far? If they answer that in any affirmative way, you can move on to question number 3. Question number 3 is what we call an alternative. Question number 3 is what we call an alternative question. We just give them a choice between 2 alternatives. And you simply say something like this. You say, well, if you were going to move forward, do you think you would do it with option A or option B? There's lots of people who have taught this technique for years in selling because it's very effective, which is option A or option B. But what I want you to pay attention to here is the use of something that we call intensifiers and softeners. In this particular example, I have used what I call a softener. And the softener is, if you were going to buy, would you? That's a softener because it's a phrase that I add to an alternative question that makes it a little bit lighter. If I wanted to add an intensifier, I would say something like this. I would say, well, it sounds like what you really want to do is blank, so should we do option A or option B? That's more of an intensifier, which actually is a great transition to question number 4. Question number 4 is what we call an inverse question. An inverse question is really unique, and it's my favorite type of closing question because you construct the question in a way that it is crafted so that if the customer or the prospect says no to the question, they've actually said yes to the sale. So for example, this is my all-time favorite inverse question. I will just say something like this. Well, at this point, is there any reason why we shouldn't move forward? Is there any reason at this point where you wouldn't want to move forward? And I could add an intensifier to make this a little more firm by saying something like, is there any reason why you shouldn't go ahead and sign up? So notice how I can adapt the language to any of these questions with intensifiers and softeners, and it suddenly changes the whole dynamic of the question. But the root of the question is the same. It's an inverse question, a question that is cleverly constructed in a way that if I ask it to where the prospect says no to the question, they really said yes to the sale. So if you ask that inverse question and you say, well, gosh, is there any reason at this point why you wouldn't want to move forward? And they say, no, I don't think so. Then you can proceed to question number 5. Question number 5 is what we call a leading question. And when you hear that phrase leading question, you probably think of lawyers in a courtroom because that's where the name comes from. And the reason that lawyers are not allowed in a courtroom to ask leading questions is because leading questions are super effective. They're super effective. They're super persuasive. And a leading question isn't really a question at all. It's more of a statement or a conclusion that you make as the salesperson, and then you simply tack on a little question at the end to get an affirmative agreement from the prospect. So in our example, right, if I've walked somebody through and I said on question number 4, is there any reason why you wouldn't move forward? And if they say, no, I don't think so, I'll say, okay, well, if I'm reading you right, it sounds like this is a good idea. So why don't we just go ahead and sign you up for blank? Is that okay? Right? So I'm making the decision, I'm stating the thing that should happen, and then the leading question is that okay? Or I could say something like, don't you think it makes sense that we go ahead and just sign you up for option B? That would be a leading question as well, right? It's the, don't you think it makes sense? You can also say, isn't it, can't it, might it, won't it, couldn't it, shouldn't it, wouldn't it? Those are all the kinds of phrases that become leading questions. They're phrases that you tack onto statements that then turn them in to questions, and those questions are great at the end of a sales process. Now notice the sequencing of how I position these questions. They start being the least committal. Question number 1 is, would you be open-minded to exploring that idea? That's a very non-committal question, even though it gets us moving in the right direction. And then when I get down to question number 2, I say, what's your favorite part of what you've seen so far? That's also a very non-committal question. But once again, it's building affirmative momentum. Then when I get into question number 3, where I say, well, if you were going to move forward, do you think you'd do option A or option B? That alternative option question is a little bit more intense. It's a little bit more firm because I'm sort of narrowing down their options. And then when I get to the 4th question, the inverse question, where I simply say, well, is there any reason why you wouldn't do this? That's a really simple question. And that's a very casual, nonchalant way to structure it. And then by the time you get to the leading question at the end, they've basically said yes without saying yes. So all you need to do is sort of lock it down and move on. And you can be very assumptive with a leading question like, well, if I'm reading you right, it sounds like you're really ready to move forward with option A, aren't you? Great. Let's get you started. That's it. 5 questions that you can use to close any sale of any type, of any price point, for any type of product. I promise, do this, you'll start making more revenue right away. If you want more tips like this on how to make money from your business and your personal brand, make sure you request a call from our team. Just look for the link down below in the show notes and we'll get you set up to talk with someone from our team.